He said, "We'll take a picture together later." I stood there smiling for hours. Later never came. And in every photo album, every frame, every tagged memory, I simply wasn't there. The wedding was held at an old converted barn north of Des Moines, with whitewashed beams and fairy lights hanging from the rafters. Luke had always said he wanted something simple but elegant. That's what his bride called it when she thanked the vendors on Instagram. Simple elegance with a touch of magic. I was in the third row, left side. Not quite family, not quite guest of honor. Somewhere in between. They seated me next to the groom's elementary school soccer coach and a cousin I hadn't seen since 1982. I wore navy, not black. It wasn't a funeral, but a dignified blue that I'd had tailored just for the day. I'd even curled my hair myself that morning, standing under the bathroom light with trembling hands and a quiet determination not to look tired in the photos. When Luke walked down the aisle in his tailored gray suit, I felt something in my chest tighten. He looked sharp, handsome. Nothing like the toddler who used to crawl into my lap with sticky fingers and ask me if I believed in dragons. After the ceremony, people started milling around the cocktail tables. Champagne flutes clinked. Everyone with a phone turned into an amateur photographer. I saw people taking selfies, posing in front of the flower arch, laughing, adjusting ties. The air smelled like roses and heat. That's when Luke passed by me on the patio and patted my hand. "We'll take a picture together later, Grandma, I promise." I smiled, of course. I said, "Of course, darling." What else does a woman say when her grandson says later? I stood near the side doors for most of the reception. The wooden benches inside were too hard and the noise too much. I didn't dance, didn't drink. I just watched. Waited. And every time I saw a camera go up, I straightened my shoulders, smoothed the front of my dress, tilted my chin just so. But no one pointed a camera my way. At one point, I saw Luke and his bride laughing with her college friends, posing with her sorority sisters, doing a dip kiss in front of the catering truck. The photographer, a young woman in jeans and a black blazer, buzzed around them like a hummingbird. There were photos with her parents, his parents, the bridesmaids, the groomsmen, the flower girl, even the dog. I stood off to the side near the hydrangea hedge, sipping lukewarm lemonade, waiting for later. The sky turned gold, then dusky blue, then navy, like my dress. The music shifted to slower ballads. People began gathering coats, hugging goodbye. A few called out goodbyes to me with distracted waves. I waited until most of the guests had left before approaching Luke. He was at a table, loosening his tie and sipping what looked like whiskey. His new wife was laughing with her maid of honor by the fire pit. "Darling," I said gently, "should we get that picture now?" He blinked, then rubbed his forehead. "Oh, Grandma, I think the photographer already packed up. I'm so sorry. The day just flew by, you know?" I nodded. I smiled again. Of course it flew by. He hugged me, half a hug, one arm, distracted. "Thanks for coming. It meant a lot." I rode home in a hired car. The driver was quiet, thank God. I didn't want to speak. My knees ached, my back throbbed, but mostly it was my face that hurt, from holding the smile in place for 8 hours. At home, I set my clutch on the entryway table, kicked off my shoes, and changed into my house dress. I stood in the kitchen and made tea in the same pot I'd used for 30 years. Steam rose, but it didn't warm me. I sat at the table, hands curled around the mug. I'd brought a wedding card with a check inside, generous, as always. I'd handed it to Luke quietly before the ceremony. No public scene, no big presentation, Just a gesture from a grandmother to her grandson. The phone buzzed. A message from a neighbor. Saw some photos on Facebook? What a gorgeous wedding. You looked lovely. I opened the app. Scrolled. Her dress, her smile, the first dance, the cake cutting, the bouquet toss. Luke with his friends. Luke with his parents. Luke with her parents. Luke with the band, with the dog, with the caterers. No Olivia. Not even in the background. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. Then I closed the app and turned the phone face down. Later, never came. And that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, I made a decision. It was small, quiet, internal. No rage. No drama. Just a shift. A change in posture. He might not have made room for me in his photographs, but I had a will, and he would not be in it. The morning after the wedding, the air felt stale in my house. I opened the windows even though the breeze carried a bite. It was the kind of chill that reminded you summer was over, that things don't stay warm just because you want them to. I made my usual breakfast: 1 egg, dry toast, half a banana. Not because I was hungry, but because habit fills the silence. My hands moved without thinking, cracking, slicing, toasting. I watched the toaster glow orange. Thought of how many mornings I'd fed Luke in this kitchen. Cinnamon toast, chocolate chip pancakes, dinosaur-shaped eggs, whatever he liked. I'd always tried to make things nice for him. Now I chewed the plain toast slowly and thought about the word forgotten. It's a word people throw around lightly, like forgetting a key or forgetting to call. But being forgotten on purpose, that's something else entirely. That's a decision, not an accident. My neighbor Ruth dropped by just after 10. She came in without knocking, as usual, balancing a tin of cookies in one hand and the newspaper in the other. "Did you see the Gazette?" she asked, setting everything down. "There's a whole spread on Luke's wedding. Page 3. I hadn't seen it. I didn't want to. She flipped to the page, spreading it open on the kitchen table like she was unveiling treasure. "There's your boy. Doesn't he look like a movie star?" I looked. Luke, standing under an arch of eucalyptus and peonies, his bride leaning into him, radiant, timeless. A black and white photo, classic and romantic. Below it, small-town sun. Ties the knot in rustic Iowa ceremony. They listed the names of the bride's parents, the groom's parents, the bridal party, the officiant, even the florist. My name wasn't there. Ruth didn't notice. "They must have had 100 people," she said, biting into a cookie. "Was it just beautiful?" "I bet they got a photo of you two. I'll check his Facebook later." I didn't say anything, just smiled politely and offered her tea. She chattered about her daughter's promotion and the church bake sale. I nodded at the right moments. But inside, something was stiffening. Not freezing, no. Freezing is too passive. This was firmer, settling, resolving. After Ruth left, I sat in the den and opened the album I'd kept since Luke was born. The first ultrasound photo, his birth bracelet from the hospital. A lock of baby hair in an envelope. His drawings, cards he made me for Christmas and Mother's Day, crooked hearts and glitter-glued scribbles. "To the best grandma in the world. I love you to the moon and back." I ran my fingers over the paper, remembering the weight of him on my hip, the way he used to insist on holding my hand even at age 10. The silence of the room pressed in. The clock ticked too loudly. My tea had gone cold. I stood and walked to the closet in the guest room. On the top shelf, in a blue plastic folder, were the legal papers. My will, my medical directives, copies of insurance policies, For years, everything had been arranged neatly. My house, my accounts, my belongings, all to be split between my son and my grandson. Because that's what family does. That's what I believed. But now I pulled the folder down and placed it on the dining table. I flipped through the pages slowly, reading each line like it belonged to someone else. The wording was so familiar. To my beloved grandson, Luke McKay, I leave. I read the sentence 3 times. Then I picked up a pen. I didn't cross anything out. Not yet. I just held the pen above the paper and let the weight of it settle in my hand. Luke had a habit of saying he'd call me later, of waving vaguely across the room, of sending Christmas cards with printed signatures and no note inside. I'd excused all of it. He's busy. He's young. He'll come around. But he was old enough to rent a venue and hire a photographer and post a dozen photos of himself online. Old enough to give a speech thanking everyone who shaped who he is today and not glance once in my direction. I put the pen down. I wasn't ready to change the will. Not yet. But I wasn't leaving it the way it was, either. Instead, I opened a new folder on my desk, labeled it Revision, Private. In it, I wrote a single note. He said we'd take a photo together, he said later. But there was no later. I waited the whole day, the whole week. I looked through every photo. I wasn't in any of them. If I don't belong in the memories, I won't belong in the legacy either. Then I closed the folder, locked it in the drawer, and stood by the window. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves blew down the street like something trying to escape. I watched them go. The week drifted by like fog over a cornfield, slow, quiet, dull around the edges. I didn't hear from Luke. Not a text. Not a call. Not even one of those cheery, forwarded memes he sometimes sent, like a digital pat on the head. His silence wasn't loud. It was ordinary, casual, and that was worse, because it meant he didn't even feel the absence. On Thursday, my son Malcolm called. "How are you, Mom?" He always opened with that, like an obligation, a reflex more than a question. "I'm well," I said. "Tired, maybe. And you?" "Oh, you know, work's been a lot. Audrey's dealing with that sinus thing again." There was a pause. He cleared his throat. "Listen, I know the wedding was a lot, but it was a beautiful day, huh?" I stared at the vase of half-dead chrysanthemums on my table. It was. They're settling in. Luke says the honeymoon was wonderful. He mentioned you looked nice at the ceremony. I almost smiled at that, but not nice enough for a photo. Malcolm didn't answer right away. I heard the soft rustle of papers on his end. I'm sure it wasn't intentional. Weddings are hectic, Mom. Things slip through the cracks. I leaned back in the kitchen chair and stared at the ceiling. No one forgets the photographer, or their grandmother. He sighed. "Come on, don't be like that. Luke loves you." I didn't answer. Malcolm's tone shifted. That mild irritation in his voice, the same one he used when he was 10 and I asked him to clean his room. "Look, maybe you're taking this too personally. I mean, you were there. You were part of the day." I could almost hear his shrug. I was seated next to a man who once coached Luke in 3rd grade and couldn't remember his name, I said calmly. No one introduced me to the bride's family. No one asked if I needed anything. I waited 8 hours for one photo, Malcolm. Just one. That doesn't mean anything. It means enough, I interrupted. He went quiet. And then, more softly, "So what now? You're going to punish him over a wedding photo?" I let that question hang there. I could have said a dozen things. I could have told him about the Christmases where Luke skipped my house entirely, about the birthday dinners that never materialized, about the time I sat alone in the church pew during Malcolm's vow renewal because Grandma doesn't like to travel, when in fact, I was never invited. But instead, I said, "No, I'm just taking note of what belongs to whom." He scoffed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, darling, just housework, paperwork." Malcolm muttered something under his breath, then said, "Anyway, Luke might stop by next weekend. He's got some boxes in your garage. He said he'd come by and get them." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. "I'll be here." After he hung up, I stood for a long time in the center of the kitchen. The fridge hummed. The clock ticked. A truck rumbled past outside. But inside me, there was a hush. A kind of quiet that wasn't sadness or anger, just clarity. I went to the garage and found the boxes Luke had left. Old college notes, a lamp, a space heater, a box labeled "Books, Keep," another labeled "Misk, Grandma's." I opened the last one. Inside, a football trophy, a broken phone charger, a few t-shirts from high school, a drawing he did of a dinosaur with my name scrawled on it. I held the drawing in my lap. The paper had curled at the edges, and the crayon had faded, but it was still there. To Grandma O, "You are the best!" And maybe I had been. Once. I pulled out an empty bin from the closet and began packing. Not just his things, but everything that had grown heavy in my house. The souvenirs, the dust-covered picture frames, the things I'd kept out of loyalty, not love. By the time the sun dipped below the tree line, I had 4 boxes sealed with tape and labeled, "For Luke." I stacked them near the door. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the revision private folder again. I took out a yellow legal pad and began making a list. Not of grievances, not of regrets, of assets. My house, my accounts, my car, my jewelry, my pension, my savings bonds. I wrote it all down, line by line, and beside each one, I made a new column. Recipient. Some lines I left blank. Some I filled with names that weren't in my family. There's a girl down the street who brings me groceries on rainy days. There's a young man at the pharmacy who walks me to my car. There's my friend Judith from book club, who always checks in if I miss a meeting. And then there's me. I added my name to 3 of the lines, things I would use now for myself while I was still here. The folder didn't go back in the drawer that night. I left it out, right on the desk, so I could see it every morning. A reminder. If you are erased from the frame long enough, you start to realize you don't need to wait for someone to crop you back in. You simply walk out of the picture and take the rest of the album with you. Saturday morning came with a heavy sky, one of those Iowa grays that makes everything look like it's been filmed in black and white. I opened the curtains in the front room, brewed my coffee, and waited. Luke was supposed to come by sometime in the morning for the boxes. He hadn't confirmed. He never did. But I had set the bins near the door the night before, lined up like passengers waiting for departure. At 10:48, I saw his car pull into the driveway, a dark blue SUV, shiny and spotless. Not the one I helped him buy in college. That one had long since been traded in. He sat inside for a minute before getting out. He didn't knock. Just opened the storm door and stepped in like it was still his home. "Hey, Grandma," he called. His voice still had that boyish lilt, that easy charm. "In the kitchen," I answered. He walked in holding his phone, barely glancing up. "Sorry I didn't text. Things got hectic this morning." "It's fine," I said. "Coffee?" He shook his head. "Nah, can't stay long. We've got a housewarming thing for one of Annie's friends. Just came for the boxes." They're by the door." He nodded and walked back out of the room. I listened to the cardboard rustle as he lifted them, one by one. After the third box, he paused. "What's this one? Misk? Grandma's?" I dried my hands on a towel. "Things you left here over the years. Didn't want to throw anything away in case you still cared for it." He opened the box and pulled out the dinosaur drawing. I saw his brow furrow. "Wow," he said. "I made this?" "You did," I replied. He held it for a moment, then set it back into the box without comment. I watched him. Not with malice, not with hope. Just curiosity. Would he say anything? Would he remember? Instead, he picked up the last box and said, "That should be all. Thanks, Grandma." He headed toward the door, then stopped. "Oh, did you get the wedding pictures? Annie's been putting together an album." "I saw them online," I said. He winced slightly. "Yeah, about that. I meant to send you a print or two. Things just got crazy. But we'll get you one." "No rush," I said. After all, I wasn't really in them. Luke opened his mouth, then closed it. Rubbed the back of his neck like he did when he was caught off guard. I thought we had one together," he said. "We don't." Another pause. The kind that stretches too long to be comfortable. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I really am. It wasn't on purpose." I nodded, though I didn't believe it mattered. "Do you remember what you said that day?" I asked. "About the photo?" He frowned. "I don't know. Probably said we'd take one later." "You did." He looked at the floor. "I didn't mean to leave you out." "I know," I said. "That's the part that hurt." He didn't have an answer for that. Just adjusted the strap on one of the boxes and said, "We'll talk soon, okay?" "Sure." He left. The screen door clicked shut behind him. I stood there, holding the towel in my hands, twisting it slowly. The silence after he left wasn't sad. It was sharp, like the air after thunder. Clear. I felt awake in a way I hadn't in years. That afternoon, I pulled the old photo albums from the bookshelf. The leather-bound ones I used to keep meticulously, birthday parties, first days of school, summer vacations. Luke was in all of them, grinning in Halloween costumes, holding report cards, sitting on my lap. I took them down, one by one, and began the slow process of sorting. Some photos I kept. Some I set aside. Some I quietly placed in a separate envelope marked Return. I wasn't erasing him. I was just giving him back what was his. By evening, the shelves looked bare but honest. The remaining photos told a different story, not of who I raised, but of what I loved. Pictures of the garden in full bloom. My husband, Harold, with dirt on his face and a smile that filled the frame. My friend Ruth and I at the state fair, holding corn dogs and laughing. Me, sitting on the porch with a book and the cat curled at my feet. Me, standing by the apple tree I planted the year Luke was born. Me, alone, but whole. I made a new album, just for those. Labeled it Mine. Later that night, I sat down with a cup of mint tea and the Revision Private folder. I flipped to the asset list, took a red pen from the drawer, drew a line through Luke's name on the house. There was no anger in my hand, just steadiness. Then I wrote a new name in the margin. I hadn't decided who it would go to yet, but it would be someone who saw me. Someone who would remember, not to take a picture, but to be present. Because photographs are nice, but presence, real, attentive, willing presence, that's legacy. And Luke had already stepped out of the frame. On Monday, I called my lawyer. His name was Stuart Bell, a quiet man with a sharp mind and soft shoes. We'd first met when Harold died. Stuart handled everything with dignity. No sales pitches, no pretense. just facts and papers, and a calm that steadied my hands while I signed away grief into legal formality. He answered on the third ring. "Bell and Cartwright, this is Stewart." "It's Olivia McKay," I said. "I'd like to make some updates to my documents, in person." He didn't ask questions. "Come in Wednesday at 10? "I'll be there." When I hung up, I felt something settle in me. Not relief, not excitement. More like a rearrangement, like furniture being pushed back against the wall after too many years sitting wrong. The space inside me grew quiet. Ready. I spent Tuesday going through drawers, old statements, deeds, a list Harold and I had once written in blue ink. If anything happens, so much had already happened. I pulled out the jewelry box from the closet shelf. Not much of it was real. Just a few heirlooms, a string of pearls from Harold's grandmother, a locket I'd worn once on our anniversary. I laid them out on a towel and looked at them, piece by piece. When you reach a certain age, everything you own becomes a question. Who will it go to? Who will use it? Who will care? Once, I would have said Luke. Now? I wasn't sure he'd even notice if they were gone. The locket, though, I held that one longer. Inside was a picture of Harold on one side and Luke as a baby on the other. Their faces stared back at me from a time when I thought love was enough to keep people close. I snapped it shut. Maybe love is enough, but it only works if it moves in both directions. Wednesday morning, I wore my navy coat and carried my documents in a stiff leather folder. The wind was brisk, snapping flags against poles as I walked from the parking lot to Stewart's office. The sky had that winter glare, too bright, too cold, the kind that exposes everything. His assistant greeted me with a smile. "He's expecting you, Mrs. McKay." Stewart's office was the same as I remembered. Wood paneling, neat stacks, a ficus plant that had somehow survived the last 15 years. "Olivia," he said, standing to shake my hand. "You look well." "I look determined," I replied, and that made him chuckle. We sat. I laid out the papers. He adjusted his glasses and flipped through them carefully. "Some substantial changes," he said. "Yes." "And you're sure?" "As sure as I've ever been." He nodded once. "Then let's begin." We spent an hour reviewing each clause. I removed Malcolm and Luke as primary beneficiaries. I added language about charitable donations, a scholarship fund in Harold's name, a donation to the local library, my second home for 4 decades. As for the house, I left that line blank, just for now. I needed more time. But the rest? Clear. Clean. Final. When we finished, Stewart leaned back. "This is thorough," he said. "A good document. Fair." "It's not about fairness," I said. "It's about accuracy." He studied me for a moment. "Would you like to leave a letter with it? Something to explain?" "No," I said. "They'll understand. Or they won't. But they'll know it wasn't an accident." I signed my name. Stewart notarized the pages, stamped the corner, slid everything into a blue folder. "It's done," he said. I nodded. On the way home, I stopped at the diner near Main Street. The waitress knew me by name, brought me coffee without asking, called me Un. I ordered eggs and toast and sat near the window, watching people go by. 2 boys rode past on bicycles. A woman walked her dog. A delivery driver loaded crates into the bakery. Ordinary life. Honest, unnoticed, constant. I liked that no one in the diner knew who I used to be in my family. No one saw me as Luke's grandmother, or Malcolm's mother, or Harold's widow. I was just Olivia, ordering eggs and minding her own business. That afternoon, I returned home and placed the new will in the fireproof box at the back of the closet. next to old passports and marriage certificates, and that one letter Harold wrote me before his surgery in case he didn't come back. I read it again. Liv, if you're reading this, it means I left early. I hope not. But if I did, I want you to live exactly how you want. No guilt. No waiting on anyone. You've earned your peace. Take it. I folded it carefully and placed it on top of the will. Then I brewed another cup of tea and sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees. I thought of Luke, of his smooth excuses and distracted eyes, of the wedding dance I watched from the shadows. I thought of how silence isn't always cruelty. Sometimes it's just clarity, and sometimes clarity is exactly what you need to start over. The next Sunday, the house was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the hollow kind. I'd done all the chores by noon, laundry folded, dishes washed, the bird feeder refilled. I even scrubbed the baseboards in the hallway just to give my hands something to do. But by 2 o'clock, I was restless. So I went for a walk. There's a stretch of sidewalk that winds past the Methodist church, loops through the park, and ends near the small lake where Harold and I used to take Luke when he was little. We'd bring stale bread for the ducks and lemonade in a thermos. Luke used to name every duck. Called one of them Captain Waddles. I walked slower now. My knees didn't like the cold, but the wind off the water was soft that day, brushing past my collar like a whisper. I sat on a bench under the willow tree, the one that used to shelter us from summer sun. There were no ducks, just ripples. And then I heard her. "Mrs. McKay?" I turned. A young woman in a puffer coat waved from the path. Her cheeks were pink from the air. "Carmen," I said, recognizing the cashier from the pharmacy. She was maybe 30, with kind eyes and a soft voice that always asked if I needed help carrying anything. She sat beside me without asking. "You come here often?" "I used to," I said. "Not as much lately." She nodded, pulled out a bag of almonds. "Want some?" I laughed softly. "Depends. Are they salted?" "Lightly. Doctor's orders." We shared them in silence for a minute. Then she said, "My grandma passed last year. I still walk her dog sometimes. Feels weird not having anyone waiting at the other end." I looked at her. "What was her name?" "Ramona. She raised me mostly. My mom was complicated." I nodded, understanding more than I said. "She taught me how to sew," Carmen continued. "Wouldn't let me leave the house in anything with holes. Said if you present yourself like you matter, eventually the world will agree." She was right. I still sew patches on my jeans, just for her. We sat quietly for a while. Then she asked, "Do you have family nearby?" "I have a son," I said, "and a grandson." She smiled. "That's nice." I didn't correct her. Before we parted, she said, "If you ever need help with groceries or anything, just let me know. I live on Pine Street." "I might take you up on that," I said, and meant it. Back home, I stood in my hallway staring at the photos still on the wall. Most of them were family pictures. Luke as a toddler, Malcolm on his wedding day, the whole group at the cabin in '02. I pulled them down one by one, not out of spite, out of space. The frames went into a box in the closet. I didn't throw them away, just moved them out of sight. In their place, I hung the landscapes Harold used to paint in the garage, rolling hills, distant barns, a field of sunflowers that never quite looked finished. But they were ours. His, then mine. Honest and quiet. That evening, I wrote a letter. Not to Luke, to Carmen. "Dear Carmen, you offered help today without knowing anything about what I might need. That's rare. And it meant more than you know. I told her about the extra pears on my tree in fall, about the old books I'd be giving away soon. I told her she reminded me of someone I used to be proud to be. I didn't mention Luke at all. When I sealed the envelope, I felt something shift. For years, I'd been writing checks and baking pies and waiting by the phone, thinking if I just kept giving enough, they'd remember I mattered. Now, I was starting to remember it myself. That night, I made dinner just for me. Pork chops, applesauce, and roasted carrots. I set the table, lit a candle, sat in the chair Harold used to use and didn't cry about it. I was still here, still warm, still eating, still someone. After dinner, I went into the back room and opened the safe. The documents were still there, untouched since the meeting with Stuart. I pulled out the envelope labeled House and stared at the blank line. And then, for the first time, I wrote something. Just a name. Not a family name, but one that had come to mind as I ate almonds with a girl under a willow tree. Then I placed the paper back inside, shut the safe, and went to bed. The house didn't feel hollow anymore. It felt full of decisions. The next letter came on a Thursday, slid neatly through my mail slot like any other envelope, but thicker. The return address was Luke's, and the handwriting on the front looked careful, almost deliberate. I set it on the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee before opening it. Inside was a folded sheet of printer paper and 2 glossy photographs. In the first photo, Luke stood beside his new wife under that wedding arch, the one wrapped in eucalyptus and fairy lights. Everyone was there, the bridesmaids, the groomsmen, her parents, his parents. I searched the frame for myself. Nothing. The second photo was worse. It was taken at the reception, a group shot of guests around one of the long farmhouse tables. The caption scribbled on the back read, "Everyone who made the day perfect." Again, I was nowhere in it. I unfolded the letter. "Dear Grandma, I've been thinking about the wedding a lot and wanted to send you a few of our favorite pictures. I hope you had a good time that day. It meant a lot that you were there. Annie and I are still getting settled, but we'd love to have you over sometime soon. Things have been crazy. Sorry it took so long to send these. Hope you're doing well. Love, Luke." No apology, no acknowledgement of what was missing. Just 2 empty photos and a note full of small words that dodged the truth. I folded the pictures back into the envelope and slid them into the drawer where I keep old batteries and stamps. They didn't belong in the photo album. They didn't belong on the fridge. They didn't belong anywhere, really. That afternoon, I pulled the donation paperwork from my desk. I had contacted the public library last week, asking about endowment options. The director, a woman named Rachel, called me personally. "We have a youth reading program that's underfunded," she said. "Our teen volunteers could use some support. It wouldn't take much to make a real difference." I remembered the day I brought Luke there for the first time. He must have been 7. He clutched my hand as we walked through the double doors, eyes wide at the shelves. That same summer, he joined the reading club and read 17 books in 2 months. I had the certificate in a drawer somewhere. I also remembered the last time I suggested he read something. He'd waved it off. "Nobody reads anymore, Grandma. That's your generation." My pen hovered over the form. "In memory of Harold McKay and in honor of readers yet to come." I filled in the rest, then mailed the envelope with a check that would have once gone toward something for Luke. Something he might have worn or driven or deposited without a thank you. Now it would buy books for children whose names I didn't know. And somehow, that felt closer to legacy than anything else I'd ever done. Later, I baked a small lemon cake, Harold's favorite, not for any occasion, just because I had the lemons, and the day felt like it needed something sweet. As it cooled, I wrote a short note and walked it down the block to the pharmacy. Carmen was working the register. I placed the foil-wrapped cake on the counter. "It's just lemon," I said. "Nothing fancy." She smiled. "Homemade is always fancy." "Tell your co-workers it's from Ramona's granddaughter's friend," I said, and she grinned. That night, as I washed the dishes, the kitchen filled with the smell of lemon and the low hum of the radio. The announcer was reading the news, but I wasn't listening. I was thinking of Luke's photos again. There I was, present at the wedding, invisible in the aftermath. Sometimes the deepest absence isn't when someone forgets to invite you. It's when they invite you, then forget you were ever there. I thought about what Carmen would do with the cake. Maybe she'd share it. Maybe she'd take it home. Maybe she'd eat it on her break and think of Ramona. That felt like more presence than anything I'd seen in those photos. Before bed, I returned to the closet and opened the fireproof box. The will was there, the revised names, the updated accounts. I hadn't added a letter yet, not for Luke, not for Malcolm, not even for Carmen. But I was ready now. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. At the top, I wrote, "In the end, presence mattered more than proximity." Then I started writing everything they would never expect to read. Because if they were going to be surprised by something, it wouldn't be my absence from a photo. It would be the clarity of my voice in the one place they couldn't edit me out. 2 weeks later, Malcolm called again. He always called on Thursdays, as if setting a calendar reminder absolved him of warmth. "Hey, Mom," he said, like he always did. "Malcolm." "I was talking to Luke," he began, already sounding defensive. "He mentioned you seemed a little off lately. Everything all right?" "Define off," I said, pouring tea into my cup. "He said you were cold, that you didn't seem like yourself when he came by." "Ah," I said. "So not weeping in the doorway qualifies as cold now." He sighed. "Mom?" "No, really, Malcolm, I'd like to understand. What was I supposed to do? Thank him for mailing me photos I wasn't in? Or maybe applaud the effort of pretending I was part of something I clearly wasn't?" There was a long pause. "He's trying," he said finally. "Trying what, exactly? Trying to pretend?" "He's young. He doesn't always think." "He's 32, I snapped. "Old enough to sign a mortgage. Old enough to plan a wedding. Old enough to know when someone's standing alone at the edge of a crowd." Malcolm fell silent. When he spoke again, his tone had changed, lower, flatter. "So this is what it's going to be? Some kind of punishment?" "No," I said. "It's not punishment, it's correction." He didn't like that. I could tell by the exhale that hissed through his teeth. "You're rewriting your will, aren't you?" I didn't answer. "You think I don't know? Luke said you were asking about endowments, donations, taking photos off the walls." "Luke notices what's missing," I said. "Not what's there. That's been the problem all along." Another pause, then a shift in tactic. "We're your family," he said. "We've always been your family." I took a sip of tea. "And yet, I've never felt more alone than I did surrounded by all of you." That was the truth, and we both knew it. Malcolm didn't argue. Just mumbled something about needing to go and hung up. I placed the phone on the table, gently, and let the silence return. It didn't scare me anymore. I was starting to like its company. That Saturday, I went to the library. Rachel, the director, greeted me at the front desk. "Mrs. McKay, your letter was lovely." I meant every word, I said. We'd love to name the reading room after your husband, she said. The Harold McKay Literacy Wing. I smiled. He would have blushed himself red. She led me through the stacks, past the rows of children's books, to a corner room with soft lighting and beanbag chairs. This is where we'll start the new program. I'd like to volunteer, I said. Rachel blinked. Really? I read well, I said. And I have time. That's more than most can offer. She laughed. We'd love to have you. We spent the next hour going over the curriculum. Story time, after-school help, a weekend writing club. I took the schedule home and pinned it to my refrigerator. That evening, I pulled down the last family photo from the hallway wall. It was one of those posed studio shots. Luke as a teenager, Malcolm with dyed hair, me in a sweater with shoulder pads that had no business existing. I studied it for a moment. Then I flipped it over and wrote one word on the back. Before. I placed it in the box with the rest. Not trash. Not keepsake. Just done. Then I lit a candle, made myself a sandwich, and sat by the window to watch the street lamp flicker on. I was starting to feel something again, not joy, not quite, but freedom. The freedom of saying, this space is mine now. Of building a new story, one not written in the margins of someone else's life. And tomorrow, I would read to children whose eyes lit up when someone spoke just to them. No photos needed, just presence, the kind that doesn't forget you were there. I started reading at the library on Tuesday afternoons. They gave me a lanyard with my name printed on a plastic badge, Olivia McKay, volunteer. I wore it like armor. The first session was small. 4 children, 3 girls and a boy, all between 7 and 10. They sat on beanbags shaped like animals and looked at me with the kind of cautious curiosity kids have for anyone over 60. The book was Charlotte's Web. I'd brought my own copy, the same one I used to read to Luke when he was little. His name was still scrawled inside the front cover, written in green marker. I thought I might hesitate, that the name would stop me cold, but it didn't. I read it aloud, slowly, with rhythm. The children leaned in, whispering guesses, laughing in the right places. One of the girls, Lila, chewed on her sleeve while she listened, her eyes wide at every sentence. Afterward, she asked, "Are you coming back next week?" "Yes," I said. "I'll be here." When I left the library that afternoon, the air smelled like warm pavement and pine mulch. I walked a little slower, not from age, but to make the moment last. That night, I wrote another letter. This one wasn't to Carmen or the library. It was to myself. Dear Olivia, you waited years for someone to show up for you the way you showed up for them. You cooked, you funded, you called. You remembered every birthday, every dentist appointment, every childhood nightmare. You gave. You gave everything. And when you needed presence, not just attendance but recognition, you were left standing alone in navy blue. So here's what you're doing now. You're building a life around people who see you, who choose you, who show up without being summoned. You're not bitter. You're not angry. You're clear. And clarity is a mercy. Keep going. Me. I folded it and slid it into the back of my notebook, behind the pages where I kept grocery lists and new words I liked. I'd learned that clarity, once written, had a way of solidifying into courage. On Friday, Carmen dropped by with a basket of persimmons. "Didn't know if you liked them," she said, brushing snowflakes off her jacket. "I do," I replied. "They remind me of my grandmother." She sat at the kitchen table and warmed her hands on a mug of tea. We talked about her job, her rent going up, her car needing new tires. I listened, Not because I was waiting for an opening to be generous, but because I cared. And then she said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why don't you talk about your family?" I stirred sugar into my tea. Because silence is sometimes the only way to finish a conversation that never went both ways. She didn't pry, just nodded. "I used to think family was about blood," I said. "About showing up because you share a name. But now I think it's about choosing, and I'm learning to choose differently." She smiled at that. Before she left, she said, "You know, you remind me of my grandma when she got older." "How so?" "She stopped saying yes to things that made her feel small." That stayed with me long after she'd gone. That night, I lit a fire in the fireplace. First time in years. I watched the flames curl around the logs, steady and quiet. Then I pulled out the revision private folder again. It felt lighter in my hands now. Inside, I added a new page. A letter, addressed to whoever found it first. If you're reading this, then I'm gone. But I wasn't gone when I made these decisions. I was more alive than I had been in a very long time. Everything here is chosen, deliberately, consciously, with clarity. Please honor that, not because it's written in law, but because it was written in truth. I left what I had to the people who were there, the ones who listened, who looked me in the eye, who remembered I existed even when there wasn't a holiday to remind them. Family isn't inherited, it's recognized. I signed my name at the bottom and placed it atop the documents. Not to make a point, just to finish the sentence. The first snow came early that year, thick, slow flakes that fell like they had nowhere better to be. I watched them from the kitchen window, hands wrapped around a mug of cocoa I'd made just for the smell. The kind of quiet that snow brings, it's a different quiet than loneliness. It's gentler. It muffles the old noise, softens what's left. I had nowhere to go that day, and no one expected me anywhere. And for the first time, that felt like freedom. Carmen stopped by after lunch. She had her coat zipped up to her chin and carried a reusable grocery bag that clinked when she set it on the counter. "I brought wine," she said. "My landlord gave me a bottle for Christmas, but I don't drink much." "I do," I said, smiling. We sat in the front room as the snow kept falling. I poured 2 small glasses, more gesture than habit. She sipped hers like it was medicine. I took mine like memory. "You ever get tired of being alone?" she asked after a while. I thought about that. "Yes," I said. "But not in the way people expect. It's not the silence that hurts. It's realizing how long you stayed in rooms where you were invisible." She nodded. "I used to feel that at my mom's house, like I was furniture." I looked at her and said, "That's why I left my house to someone who would notice the creak of the floorboards." She blinked. "What?" I reached for the fireproof box on the shelf beside me, opened it, took out the will. "This isn't morbid," I said. "It's clarity." She didn't touch it at first, just stared. "You left it to me?" I did. "Why?" "Because when I sat on that bench near the lake, you didn't ask me why I was alone. You just sat with me. That's more presence than I've had from my blood in 10 years. She looked stunned. "I can't accept." "You already have. Every time you checked in. Every time you listened. Every time you showed up with a bag of groceries or a question that didn't need anything but truth." She covered her mouth with her hand. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," I said. "Just keep being who you already are." We didn't finish the wine. The snow kept falling. She left the house with red cheeks and promises to come back Sunday for cocoa and a puzzle. After she left, I walked through the house slowly. I touched the edge of the kitchen table, the back of Harold's chair, the notch on the hallway wall where Luke's height was recorded year by year. I wasn't angry anymore. Not even sad. I was full. Later that evening, I pulled out the last photo album I'd kept hidden on the high shelf. It was labeled to be sorted. Inside were dozens of photos I hadn't had the heart to look through. Duplicates, blurry shots, moments I couldn't throw away but couldn't place either. One caught my eye. It was a picture of me and Luke, taken when he was 6. We were at the county fair, holding hands, both of us covered in powdered sugar from funnel cakes. He was grinning, and I was laughing. Real joy. I tore the photo in half. Not from cruelty, from truth. I kept the half with me. I placed it in my new album, the one I called Mine. I didn't need the whole memory, just the part that belonged to me. Before bed, I stood by the window and watched the snow pile up on the porch steps. The streetlight cast a golden glow over everything, soft and quiet. Some things were still cold, but not my heart. That was warm now, steady, chosen, and in that warmth I finally slept deeply. December ended with small rituals. I mailed cards, not many, just a few. No glitter, no forced cheer, just handwritten notes to people who had mattered that year. Carmen got one, of course. Rachel at the library. Even Ruth, though I hadn't seen her in a while. I didn't send one to Malcolm. I didn't think he'd notice. Or worse, he'd notice and feel entitled. The cards weren't olive branches. They were acknowledgments. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for seeing me. On New Year's Eve, I stayed in. Cooked lentil stew, the kind Harold used to make with too much pepper. I played old jazz records and danced a little in the kitchen, one hand on the counter for balance. It wasn't celebration. It was presence. At midnight, I opened the window and let the cold air in. Just for a moment. Long enough to feel the difference between inside and out. I whispered, "Thank you," not to anyone in particular, just to the year that had finally clarified who I was without anyone else's framing. In January, I began tutoring at the library on Thursdays, not just reading aloud. Rachel gave me a small group, 3 kids who struggled with writing. One of them, a boy named Marcus, had trouble with verbs. He could describe anything, but couldn't pin it down with action. "It's like the stories just float," he told me. "Then we'll learn to anchor them," I said. Every week, he came back with a little more confidence, a little more strength in his sentences. His mother stopped by once to say thank you. "He actually likes books now," she said. "You did that." I didn't correct her, but I knew it wasn't just me. It was presence. Regular, quiet presence. Showing up even when you weren't asked to. Especially then. Around the same time, Carmen brought over a space heater she didn't need. "Just in case yours ever breaks," she said. I told her she was turning into the kind of person who made old women believe again. She rolled her eyes but smiled. That Sunday, I found a small package on my porch. No note. Just my name on the front in Sharpie. Inside, a framed photo. It was from years ago. Me and Luke, taken by someone I couldn't remember. I was holding a bowl of potato salad, Luke's arm slung around my shoulder. We were both laughing at something off camera. On the back, someone had written, "I found this. Thought you might want it back." There was no signature. I stared at the picture for a long time. I didn't feel joy or pain, just recognition. Yes, that happened. Yes, that version of him once existed. Yes, I had mattered then. I placed the photo on the shelf in the back room. Not in the hallway. Not in the kitchen. Just somewhere I could see it if I wanted. But only then. Because I had no intention of letting the past sneak back in through flattery or fragments. Not now. Not after all this work. A week later, I ran into Malcolm at the grocery store. Pure accident. He was in the canned goods aisle, scanning labels like they owed him something. We locked eyes. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mom. Malcolm. We stood there, both holding baskets. His had beer and tortilla chips. Mine had lentils and oranges. He looked tired. Older. I was going to call, he said. We've been meaning to invite you over. For what? He blinked. Dinner. Out of guilt? He flinched. No, of course not. I nodded. That's good, because guilt isn't much of a seasoning. He shifted his weight. You don't make this easy, Mom. I made everything easy for 30 years, I said. You just didn't notice. He looked down. I stepped past him. Take care, Malcolm. He didn't follow. I didn't look back. That night, I added another line to my letter in the folder. Just because someone once loved you doesn't mean they get to keep forgetting who you are. I underlined it twice. Then I poured myself a glass of that leftover wine and sat by the window. Outside, the snow was finally melting. Patches of grass pushed through like small truths. It was still winter, but not for long. By February, I had settled into a rhythm that no longer required explanations. Mornings belonged to the sun and the birds and my own quiet steps around the house. Afternoons were for the library or letters, or sometimes just sitting in the living room, watching the light move across the floor. Evenings were tea and writing, my kind of prayer. One morning, I got a letter from Rachel. Not email, not a printed flyer, a real letter in her handwriting. It was a thank you note for the donation. But more than that, it was gratitude in its truest form. Your generosity didn't just help us buy books, Olivia. It told the kids their stories matter. And when someone believes that, they start writing more than just sentences. They start writing themselves into the world. I read that line 3 times. Let it settle. I knew what she meant. All those years, I'd poured myself into family, believing that love would be enough to keep me real in their lives. But you can love someone so much, you vanish trying to hold their attention. Now, I was being seen not for my effort, not for my history, but for my presence, for showing up and staying visible. I kept the letter, pinned it on the fridge. That week, Carmen helped me rearrange the back room. We moved the sewing machine to the window and brought up the cedar chest from the basement. She asked about half the things I'd packed away: quilt squares, old fabrics, a pair of baby shoes. These were Luke's, I said, holding one in my hand. You kept them all this time? Not because I thought he'd want them, because I couldn't bear to throw away proof that I was once needed. She didn't say anything for a while, just watched me set the shoes gently back in the chest. You were always needed, she said. He just stopped deserving it. It was the kindest kind of cruelty, what she said, and the most accurate. That weekend, I sewed again. Nothing fancy. Just a simple patchwork quilt with squares I'd saved for too long, pieces from Harold's flannel shirts, a strip from an apron I wore in the 70s, a cotton napkin that once sat on our Thanksgiving table. I stitched the past into something warm, something useful. I planned to give it to the library's reading corner, a blanket for the children to curl under while they listened to stories. It felt better than keeping it in a trunk for a boy who might never remember the smell of his grandmother's kitchen. Around the same time, I received a letter from a law office in Des Moines. not Stewart's. A firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a brief message from Malcolm. Typed. Cold. We've learned that significant changes were made to your estate. While we respect your right to manage your affairs, we would appreciate the opportunity to discuss these choices. No greeting, no dear mom, no mention of anything human. I folded the letter and slid it into the back of the drawer. He didn't want a conversation. He wanted correction. He wasn't going to get either. The next day, I mailed a handwritten note. Not to Malcolm, to Stewart. No changes. Everything remains as is. Let them learn the value of silence. I have. A few days later, Carmen and I went to the lake. It was still half frozen, the ice cracking gently near the shore. We brought hot tea in a thermos and a paper bag of leftover muffins. We sat under the willow tree again, where it all started. "I can't believe you chose me," she said quietly. "I didn't," I replied. "You chose me. Every time you stopped to ask, every time you stayed to listen." She nodded. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked. "Not anymore." And I meant it, because the truth is, grief isn't always about death. Sometimes it's about outgrowing the place where you were once loved. And that grief, once you name it, doesn't own you anymore. You just walk forward, with clarity, with grace, with hands full of your own worth. And if you're lucky, someone walks with you. March came in loud, wet streets, brittle wind, branches tapping like old questions on the window panes. I baked more than usual, not from hunger, but from instinct. Bread, pies, biscuits. I'd freeze for later. My kitchen smelled like purpose again. One morning, I found a letter in the mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single page. "Grandma, I saw the photo you returned. The one from the fair. I didn't know you still had it. I guess I forgot about that day. I've forgotten a lot. I don't know how to fix any of this. I don't even know if I should. But I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't part of my life. You always were. I just didn't say it. I thought it was obvious. Luke." I read it 3 times, then set it beside the kettle while the water boiled. It wasn't much, and yet it was more than I'd ever expected. But not enough. It wasn't apology. It was confusion. It was the language of someone who hadn't been ignored, trying to name the feeling of being told no. And there was no return address because he didn't want a response. Not really. He wanted peace without the cost of repair. I didn't write back. That afternoon at the library, Marcus handed me a story he'd written. 10 pages. His first. It was about a boy whose shadow didn't match him. The boy kept doing things one way, and the shadow kept doing them wrong. But in the end, the shadow apologized, not by speaking, but by finally following the boy's steps, slowly, deliberately. I read the last paragraph aloud. Marcus watched me like he wasn't sure if it was good. I said, "This is what growth looks like. Not loud, not perfect, but honest." He smiled, and that was enough. That night, Carmen came by with flowers. "No reason," she said, setting them on the table. "Just thought your kitchen needed color." "Thank you." We sat and drank tea and listened to the radio. A jazz tune I half remembered drifted through the speakers, and I hummed along. She didn't ask about the letter. She didn't need to. The next day, I visited the cemetery. Not for Harold, for myself. I hadn't been in years. Not because I was avoiding him, but because I wasn't ready to see myself through his eyes. I brought no flowers. Just sat on the bench and spoke aloud. "Would you be proud of me?" I asked, "for choosing to be visible, even if it meant being alone?" I waited. Not for an answer, just for the moment to settle. The wind picked up and dropped again. I stood, brushed the bench clean, walked home. That evening, I opened my desk drawer and found an old card Luke had made in school. Mother's Day, but he'd given it to me. To Grandma Olivia, you are more than a grandma. You are the boss of my heart. I didn't cry. I smiled. Then I slipped the card into my Mine album between 2 photos of daffodils and a sunset I'd captured last spring. Because even broken things have their moments of grace. And this one? It belonged to me now. No return address needed. April brought the thaw. The last patches of snow disappeared under the stubborn bloom of crocuses and mud. The apple tree in the yard began to bud, quiet, reliable, like it always had. I stood on the porch one morning and watched a robin tug a worm from the soft earth. And for the first time in years, I didn't think of who was missing from the picture. I thought only of the bird, and the earth, and the stillness that comes when you stop asking for anything more than what is. At the library, Marcus had started helping the younger kids. Rachel called it peer mentoring. I called it beautiful. He sat with them during reading hour, helped them sound out hard words, even made them laugh when they got frustrated. "You made him brave," Rachel said to me one day. "No," I replied. "I just stayed until he found his own courage." The next week, Carmen asked if I wanted to go with her to a community meeting at the church. "They're starting a neighborhood garden," she said. "You'd like it." I hesitated, then nodded. I've got a few opinions about tomatoes. The meeting was small, folding chairs and lukewarm coffee, but I listened. I spoke. I offered seeds from my own stash, heirloom beans I hadn't planted in years. Afterward, a woman came up to me, Erica, her name was, and said, "I've seen you around. You always look like you're thinking about something important." I laughed. "I'm always thinking about something gone." She said, "Well, if you ever want to think about something growing instead, I could use help on Plot 9. That was how it began. I became a gardener again. Every Saturday morning, Carmen and I walked over with gloves and thermoses. We turned soil, planted seedlings, planned trellises. I hadn't felt that kind of ache in my back in years, and I welcomed it like an old friend. One afternoon, as we planted pole beans, Carmen said, "You ever think you'll speak to them again?" Them? Luke, Malcolm? I pressed my thumb into the dirt. "If they call, I'll answer," I said. "But I won't wait by the phone. I've waited long enough for people who don't show up." She nodded, then handed me a stake for the beans. "Here, something to lean on." And I thought, yes, that's all any of us really want, in the end. A place to grow and something to lean on. At home, I opened the safe and pulled out the will once again. I reread my letters, not to change them, just to feel them settle. Then I added a final note, just below my name. This life became mine again, not through loss, but through choosing what remains. I signed it. Closed the folder. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the stars come out. The sky was so clear I could see the tail of Orion sweeping across the dark. I remembered lying in the backyard once with Luke, years ago, tracing those same stars. He'd said, "Do you think they remember us when we're gone?" I hadn't known how to answer then, but I did now. No, the stars don't remember us. But we remember them, and that's enough. Presence leaves its mark even in the dark. May brought softness. The tree bloomed early this year, its branches heavy with pale blossoms that fluttered onto the porch like shy applause. I sat beneath them with a blanket over my knees and a notebook in my lap. I wasn't writing anything urgent, just phrases, fragments. Things I'd lived through that finally had room to breathe. Carmen came by with a bowl of strawberries from the market. "Warm enough for porch sitting?" she said. "Barely," I replied, "but I'm old and stubborn." She smiled, sat beside me, and shared the fruit. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The quiet between us had become a kind of language, proof that not all relationships required explanation or apology. Some just held. After she left, I stayed a while longer, watched a squirrel chase itself along the fence line, watched the wind try to stir petals it hadn't earned. Later that evening, I wrote my final letter. To whoever finds this, if you are holding these papers, I am no longer here in the way people usually mean. But don't imagine absence where there was so much presence. I lived quietly, but fully. I didn't shout to be seen. I stood still and waited for the ones who looked. What you hold in your hands is not revenge. It's recognition. A correction, yes, but more than that, a gift. I didn't leave this house to blood. I left it to someone who looked at me like I wasn't fading. You don't owe me grief. You owe me nothing. I give this without debt attached. But if you walk these rooms, let them stay kind. Let the garden grow wild. Let the sun through the windows in the late afternoon. That was always my favorite light. And remember this: legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you chose to carry while you were still alive. I signed my name for the last time. Then I folded the letter and placed it on top of the will, tucked everything away one final time, and stood up slowly. The house around me didn't feel like something I was losing. It felt like something I had finally set free. That weekend, Carmen and I planted tomatoes on Plot 9. We worked until our knees ached and our backs protested. At one point, she looked over and said, "I don't think I ever said thank you." Not just for the house, for everything. "You did," I said, "every time you showed up." By summer, the library reading room had new beanbags and shelves lined with bright covers and curious eyes. Marcus led his first group alone. I watched from the doorway, heart full, and on the first warm night of June, as fireflies blinked across the backyard, I made myself one final promise. No more shrinking. No more asking to be seen. I had already been seen by the right people, in the right ways. Not by accident, by choice. And if this story reached you, if something in it stayed with you, then you're part of it now too. So stay present, stay warm, and if it moved you, pass it on. Share it. Save it. Leave a comment below. Maybe it will reach someone who's still waiting to be remembered.